Welcome, everybody. My name's Jonathan Ray, and I'm the drinks editor of The Spectator. And it's a real treat for me to introduce my old chum and an old chum of The Spectator to Peter Gago, head winemaker of Penfolds in Australia. Penfolds has been making wine since 1844. It's riles me sometimes when we think of Australia as New World. It is pretty old world, in fact. They've got the oldest continually producing Cabernet Sauvignon vines in the world. And as I say, they've been making wine since 1844. Penfolds was founded by Dr. Christopher Penfold and his wife, Mary. And they've been making exceptional wines ever since. And for those of you who probably know the Canunga Hill Cabernet Shiraz, a absolute perfect crowd pleaser, 10 quid in the supermarket. We've all drunk it. I still drink it. It's a great textbook entry-level wine. But if that's the only wine of Penfolds, you know, I beg you to think again. We have some amazing wines here today to show you. And these four wines we're going to try or talk about are part of Peter Gago's must-have icon wines. And they are really quite exceptional. Some of you, the more flushed amongst you, will know Penfolds because of Grange. So between Grange, which retails for, gosh, I don't know, 500 quid, and Canunga Hill at 10 quid, there are some exceptional wines. And it's a real treat. I have to say I'm biased. I've always loved Penfolds wines. So I'm thrilled. And Peter has been, I think you're the fourth head winemaker at Penfolds. And Peter, it's fair to say that you're Aussie through and through, but in fact, you were born and brought up in South Shields. So you're not actually a Geordie, I don't think. Am I right in saying you're a sand dancer?
Indeed, indeed. Whitley Bay, South Shields, a subset is the nice way of putting it. Geordie, yeah.
So, Peter, it's great to have you here. You kindly invited me to Moscow a few years ago for the launch of the Block 42 Penfolds, which really is one of the great icons of the wine world. And I think I last saw you when you kindly hosted a really memorable dinner for the Spectator, for Spectator readers at the Maribyrnong Hotel, where you showed some incredible wines. You're a great advocate, not only for Penfolds, of course, but you've always been very generous about your colleagues and competitors in Australia. And I'm thrilled you're here to chat about Penfolds chiefly, but also give us your views on Australia. I should point out that much to the chagrin of our French colleagues, we now drink more Australian wine than we do French wine in the UK. And now is the time really to get to know Australia. So, Peter, as I say, you're a boy, a South Shields boy, a sand dancer, which I didn't even know that was a description. I only knew of the Geordie description, but you're a sand dancer. And Peter, welcome. Thank you for having us. I should point out that Peter is 11,000 miles away. I'm near Brighton in England, and Peter is stuck at home, so he says, in Melbourne. I'm slightly curious as to what hides behind the curtain, Peter. You look like you're in a hotel room somewhere very dodgy. But anyway, Peter is 11,000 miles away in Melbourne. He should be at the winery in Adelaide, but because of COVID, of course, he's stuck at home. But Peter, I'm going to stop rabbiting, but I would love to know how a Geordie boy or a sand dancer from England ended up as head winemaker of Australia's most famous winery.
Well, it was a long time ago, moving across with my parents to Australia back in 1963, actually. That's an indication of how old I am. A youngster educated in Melbourne, and I'm back here in Melbourne at the moment. Marooned, literally, because of COVID. The South Australian-Victoria border reopens tonight at midnight, and I'll be on the road tomorrow back to Adelaide, back to South Australia, back to McGill, back to the Barossa Valley. So, yes, a long time ago, and a lot of changes in between, but it's been a great journey, and becoming part of, I don't even say a brand, a culture that is Penfolds is just so good. I'm about to head into my 32nd year at Penfolds. No two have been the same, as they say, and I can honestly state that. Nothing stands still here, even if I am marooned. I'm in a different season to you. Tomorrow we head into our first day of summer. I believe you're heading into colder weather.
Sadly so, yes. It's pretty grey and foggy outside. The fog on the Tyne and all that, Peter.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Could you just tell us a bit about your journey, how you became interested in wine? I mean, I'm teasing you about your background in a
Okay,
way, because
yes,
it
sure.
doesn't seem a very obvious route to becoming a very celebrated winemaker. How did you get into wine in the first place?
Sure. Well, I think we go to high school, we go to university, and quite often, the question of parents, what do you want to do when you grow up? And for a long time, I actually didn't know. So I just continued what I was doing and ended up teaching for about 8.5 years, chemistry and mathematics, loved it, science coordinator, accelerated through the ranks, which enabled me to make a decision to go and do another degree in enology at Roseworthy. My wife, though, Gail, wasn't aware at the time that Roseworthy was in a completely different state of Australia. She thought it was down the road somewhere. And we ventured across, and it's a fantastic degree in applied science there, part of the University of Adelaide now, the oldest agricultural college of Australia. And the Roseworthy course is known throughout the world, and it's produced some incredible winemakers across many, well over a century. And started at Penfolds, did quite well, started off as a sparkling winemaker. In 1993, I moved into the red wine department, and it's pretty hard to leave the red wine department of Penfolds. And I guess you could sort of say I'm still there, but we dabble in fortified, of course, white wines and reds. And nowadays, and we'll talk more about it a little later, we're dabbling in a few other countries as well. So, yeah, the book is not yet written. There are many chapters still to be written.
And tell me, Peter, how about the heritage? As I said in my introduction, Penfolds has been making wine since 1844. You're only the fourth head winemaker. Your most famous predecessor, of course, was Max Schubert, creator of Grange. You have the oldest continually producing Cabernet vines in the world. How important is heritage, given that we see Australia as innovative as indeed Penfolds is, but it seems a fine line to tread between heritage and innovation?
Oh, absolutely. And this is the daily sort of tension between honouring styles of the past and not continuing to innovate, which we've done throughout every year across the last 176. So, we have to future-proof nowadays. We've got this little thing called climate change, not really little, happening. So we need a lot of flex in the way we look at things. And that's not even looking at what the consumer sort of fashionable things do and change or whatever. I co-hosted a dinner not so long back with the great Olivia Krug, and he wouldn't tell me, what month in 1843 Krug was founded. I think, and I suspect, Penfolds was only a few months later. And we love that tension. And, one of the great things now about the world of wine is it truly is a world of wine. And these wines sit alongside some of the great wines of the world, but a little bit different in terms of Penfolds. Your earlier point about Canunga Hill being at entry level, then the bins, and then we go even beyond Grange to special bins. And this is very unusual, a wine house making wines to style, almost like the Champenois, the house style of St Henri, the house style of RWT or Grange, or our flagship Yattarna. It's a very different mindset on what we can do with the incredible viticultural ability that our teams have access to. It's just incredible vineyards, incredible soils, and generations of expertise. But I think the strong point has always been the Penfold winemaking team, and in that I include viticulturalists and others. I'm here talking to you now of an evening here in Melbourne. The rest of the team are preparing for their work in the Barossa Valley or in the southeast of the state tomorrow. And this happens every day of the working year. So, we all have our roles within this thing called Penfolds.
How big is the team, out of interest, the winemaking team, a viticultural team?
Yeah, well, pure winemakers, there are 10 of us now, and we will bring on some extra help during harvest. In viticulture, we have not only our own vineyard managers, but we have, we call them GLOs, grower liaison officers. You see, we have very, very good multi-generational relationships with growers. So that has to be managed. So logistically across our harvest, which spreads across such a huge area. We need all of these positions, all of these interplays happening. And that's what enables us to make the range of wines that we do. It's quite complicated. It's not just one style. It's not just one viticultural area. It's very, very complex. But the complexity has evolved over 176 years.
You talk about multi-areas or multi-regional. I guess this is the most important philosophy behind Penfolds, certainly behind Grange and a number of the other wines, is, of course, they're not just blends of grapes and different parcels within vineyards, but they're blended from multi-regions. It's a multi-regional blend. I can't think of a wine off the top of my head as fine as Grange or some of the other wines in your portfolio that depends on this, because coming from a European standpoint, we're all told about terroir. And I'm sure when you sat and chatted to Olivier Krug, he was banging on very proudly about the terroir of Krug. And that's why Krug is what it is. Peter, I'd love you to explain the philosophy of blending from multi-regions, and also ask you, could you ever conceive of being able to make a wine such as Grange or RWT or whatever in Europe, given that it is blending? I guess it's like saying, I'm going to make a great wine with some Syrah from the Rhone, some Cabernet from Bordeaux, a little bit of Carignan from the Languedoc, and just a whisper of Pinot from Burgundy.
Oh, goodness me. I think you're predicting the future a little bit here. You've got the... Look, it is really interesting, but to create some context here, at Penfolds, and you mentioned the term terroir, we are huge respecters of that term and that sensitivity, sensibility, sense of place. Terroir is everything, you know, the site, the soil, the microclimate. We do honour that because we make three styles of wine. We still make single vineyard wines, and there are many of them now, more than there ever has been. It's not just the McGill Estate Shiraz of our monopole, the McGill Vineyard, 15 minutes out of the city centre. You made reference earlier to the Kalimna Block 42, 10 acres of the world's oldest continuously producing Cabernet vines. We don't make a single vineyard every year, but occasionally we do. One of them is in the Ampule. That's one style of wine we make. The other two, though, we do make styles. For example, our RWT can only ever come from the Barossa Valley. Our Bin 128 Shiraz can only ever come from the single region of Coonawarra. You know, they honour one viticultural area, but multiple vineyards within the one area. But the third style of wine that you refer to, which quite often is our most successful, is the synergistic way of blending across region and quite often across style. And we'll talk about Bin 389 in a moment when we taste it, but they are truly using, again, and borrowing the term house style. Bin 389 will be the same every year in terms of style, but no two are the same. Climatically, they're all different, but it is a Cabernet Shiraz blend. It is always Cabernet predominant. It is always stored in Quercus alba, American oak, and usually between 30 and 40% new to create that style. But the ingredients come from just where we can best get them in a given year. You know, in South Australia, and not only South Australia, we're noticing it now in Bordeaux and California and elsewhere, there is huge oscillation in ripening, in the compression quite often of ripening, in adverse conditions happening, and not only fire, not only drought, not only you name it, anything that can happen does happen. It's a thing called agriculture. So we have a means of, you know, sort of flattening a little bit the huge oscillations by this multi-regional blending. So for us, and it sounds a bit clear, but the sum of the parts blending should be synergistic as long as we abide to house style. And that's really what Penfolds is all about. You know, the junior winemakers serve an apprenticeship learning what these house styles are. It's not about a formula. It's about making wine to suit that style, to honour what has happened before, yet at the same time to try and make a better wine than what was made in one of the great vintages. But not ego-driven, not, oh, I know better, I know a new type of oak or a new... No, it's not about that. It's about all the refinements, all the 1%ers, of just getting these magical blends to outperform some of the better releases. That's really what it's about. So 3 styles of wine. The multi-regional blends, perhaps our 2 flagships, Yattarna, our Chardonnay, and Grange, our red flagship, are multi-regional blends. But we can never go past the single vineyard releases nor the single viticultural. They all have their role in this thing we call the Penfold portfolio.
Well, that makes sense. And also the proof's in the pudding, isn't it? I mean, the wines, are amazing.
Yes.
Can I mention, as I said earlier, I adore Penfolds wines. You know I'm a complete slave to your wines, Peter, but I do have a quibble, and I've mentioned this to you before, and it is your numbering your wines by the bin number. I find this very confusing. And I remember years ago taking, and of course I forget which bin number it was, but I took one of the bins, bin 2 or 12 or something, I don't know what it was, to supper, and it was something like 40 quid a bottle. I took it to dinner with a friend of mine thinking he'd be thrilled, and he looked at it, and although he knows Penfolds wine is great, I think he took it for whatever the cheapest bin number was and just put it away and opened something else. And what I wanted to say was actually this bin is seriously fine. And some of the bin numbers are quite low in price. Some of the bin numbers are quite high. And I get confused as to whether it's bin 389 or bin 42 or bin 407 or bin 169 or bin 707. How does the punter know what he or she is getting when you see one of these bin numbers on the shelf?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and one we're confronted about all the time. The confusion, we say, look, we come from Australia. That's what we're out to do, to confuse, But no, look, in all seriousness, bin numbers in a Penfold context had an historic derivation. I would ordinarily, and we were meant to be doing this transmission out of the McGill Winery, but it's terrific there. I could almost take a camera around with me and go underground and show you what were once underground bins, compartments, vaults, call it what you will, where we used to store wines in the days before refrigeration, in the days before air conditioning, for reasons different to the Champenois. A very hot place then, as hot as it is now. We'd bottle wine, but we wouldn't sell it the next day. We'd store wines and we'd let them mature in bottle, but they had to be temperature controlled. So the different vaults or compartments, we call them bins, had different numbers. That's sort of where it came from. Now, it's almost random. They say bin 707, for example, our flagship Cabernet, actually did come from an ex-Boeing executive who happened to have a short period of tenure at Penfolds. 707, pick a number, any number. But no, 389 or 28 will be the same style every year. And I often joke with people, like, for example, this is a bin 28 because we're tasting it. But I often say, if this were a bottle of bin 128, you could get some white out and get rid of the 128 on the label. And the bottle would still say Penfolds, Coonawarra, Shiraz, 2000 and whatever. So it's a shortcut. We're lazy in Australia. I often say, look, I've got the 128. Everyone knows what you're talking about. Coonawarra, Shiraz, from this vintage, whatever. We don't say it, just bottle 128, please. But over time, this little secret code, this little knowledge bank, people love it. And in fact, a number of years ago, we were going to discontinue the use of for new wines of bins. And I forget which wine we released, but we called it something or other. And there was outrage. We want a bin. And, even our bin 138, which is a Barossa, it used to be called Barossa Valley Old Vines, Grenache, Shiraz, Mataro. And people didn't like that. Now it's called bin 138. So that changed in the 92. Well, the first vintage was 92. It changed about 10 years later. So, yeah, look, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. But we have many wines like Grange, Yattarna, Saint-Henri, and others that have real names, not bins. But even if you look at a label of Grange, look closely, it will say bin 95 in small print. Yattarna, our flagship, an Indigenous word, an Aboriginal word meaning little by little or gradually, depicting the process by which we created the first Yattarna, the 95 vintage released in 98. You look closely at the label of Yattarna, it says bin 144. Now, symbolically there were 144 trials before the release of the first. But look, it is a bit geeky, it's a little bit whatever, but in many instances, in America, especially Australia, 389, you just go into a store, you know, your merchant say, bottle of 389, everyone knows what you're talking about. You know, this year we're celebrating this wine's 60th anniversary. Generations have been brought up on this now, not only in Australia, in the United Kingdom. Most people know of Bin 389, know that it's a Cabernet Shiraz blend, and it's a bit of a shortcut. But take off 389 and the label will still say Penfolds, Cabernet Shiraz, 2017. It's a shortcut. Yeah.
But then you further confuse us by, I think, isn't there a Bin 60A that was, I think I'm right in saying, the only non-French or non-European wine in the Decanter magazine's 10 wines to drink before you die. So what happened to 60B?
Yes. Good point. Yeah, that was in August of 2004, that result. Yeah, in the top 10, there were 100 wines. The top 10 were listed chronologically in order, the remaining 90 by country alphabetically. And to your point, the 1962 Bin 60A came in at wine number 7 of all wines. You know, 37 judges from around the world compiled that list. It wasn't some fellow in a back room with his mate, you know, having a bit of a sniff and a taste. This was a really serious thing. But to your question, we've released 2 of those across the years, but the second one wasn't called 60B. There was a 1962 Bin 60A and there was a 2004 released. Only 2 ever. And that's what we truly mean by special bins, 1 or 2 only ever made. Recent examples like that include the Bin 620. There was one made in 1966, and we launched a second one out of Shanghai, the 2008. There were only ever 2 made. Bin 7 from 1967, there's only ever been 1 made. So they truly are wines positioned above Grange, intermittent one-offs that collectors queue up for. The 60A, though, that you mentioned, the 1962, Johnny, there were only ever 425 cases made. It was never commercially released. James Halliday, who you'd know well, you know, the wine writer of Australia, for many years said, you know, quite possibly the greatest Australian red wine made in the 20th century. And I said to him many times, James, words come cheaply. Why don't you write that? Anyway, not only did he write that, but he went on to write at a later stage, quite possibly the greatest Australian wine ever made, the 1962 Bin 60A. But yes, a Bin 60A.
Yeah. And it was, just to reiterate, it was the only non-French wine in the top 10, was it? Is that right? Or it was
in the top 10, yes. Yeah, the only French, non-French, yeah, with incredulous wines, you know, 1900 Margaux, 45, you know, first growths, that sort of thing, DRC, that sort of company in the top 10, coming in at number 7.
Yeah. Well, that's one heck of an accolade. But listen, you're making me thirsty now. So should we try? I think we're going to try the Bin 28.
Bin 28. Yeah. Well, look, this is, I guess, a wine that can reinforce what we were talking about earlier of the meaning of bin. Bin 28 was first made in 1959, and it's been released without interruption every year since. It's always a warmer climate Shiraz. In the early days, it came predominantly, exclusively for the first few from Kalimna, our vineyard in the Barossa Valley. Nowadays, it's a blend from warmer regions, usually of South Australia. It's consecutively released to style. That style never, ever incorporates any new oak. So Bin 28 is Syrah, we call it Shiraz, you know, with unadulterated older oak. You can see here this particular vintage predominantly from the Barossa Valley with a little bit of McLaren Vale fruit and some from down in the southeast from Pathaway. 12 months in seasoned or older American oak. The term hogsheads, that's a 300-litre barrel. Different to, of course, a barrique at 225 litres. So this style will be of this style every year. The Bin 28 style has never changed since 1959, but again, reiterating what I mentioned earlier, no 2 are the same. People will collect Bin 28 not only to drink tomorrow or at Christmas or next year. Great bin 28s from terrific years, like good vintages of bin 389, will last for many, many years. In fact, currently the 71, the 76, the 1990 are drinking incredibly well. And I should point out, and I know that some of your subscribers will soon hear a bit about the 8th edition of the Rewards of Patience book, which goes through every edition or every vintage, not only of bin 28, but all of our wines, and gives an updated drinking window. This edition 8 is literally just been released as we speak, and we hope to have copies in the United Kingdom a little into the new year. So only weeks from now, people will be able to access this. We call it the Form Guide to All Things Penfolds, and you can look up and see what your older bin 28s are drinking like at this point of time. Now, whilst it might look like a little bit of a propaganda piece, it's not. An independent panel of judges from around the world put this book together. Used the term before, warts and all. You know, in this book are the good, the bad, and the ugly of all vintages, and with honest drinking windows and assessments. And bin 28 features right back to the early 60s, 1959. So drink it now. It has accessibility in youth. In a good year, hold on to it for a bit longer. That magic word, choice. You can do it now, later, or hold on to a bit. And look, not excessively expensive. It's not inexpensive, but it's not cost prohibitive. We can buy a 6-pack, and this isn't a sales pitch, and go on the journey with the wine and see whether we're right, wrong, or whatever. You know, many people, Johnny, will prefer the exuberance of the primary fruit, the vivacity of youth, and will drink it within a year or two. Others will want secondary or tertiary characters and might drink this as a 20 or 30-year-old. The choice is theirs. Not everyone has a cellar. More and more people, though, are accessing wine storage and or with wine cabinets, who's to know. But isn't it wonderful to have that choice? Yeah.
And also, I'm right in saying that of this collection of wines that you've curated for Spectator readers, there are 4 bottles, and then this is the free 5th one. So this is the wine that's added to the box gratis, which is very generous of you, Peter.
All of my colleagues in our Twickenham office.
Well, here's to the Twickenham office. How many parcels would have been blended for this? How many? Talk me through the blending process, because I know it's just the one grape, but sure. Talk to me.
Yes.
Yeah, that still means that it is blended. Harvest,
yeah, absolutely. This is a very big blend and a much larger blend than, for example, Grange by volume, but the process is quite similar. After harvest, for example, in this year, our harvest is 6 months earlier than the Northern Hemisphere harvest. So we'll finish fermenting usually late April. May, end of May, sometimes as late as the start of June, we will have what we call classification tastings, where every parcel, whether it be in oak already or in storage in stainless steel, is assessed. We start with Grange and we work our way through the portfolio. So bin 28 might actually benefit by getting a little bit of relegated Sononry fruit. You know, bin 389, for example, we refer to that as baby Grange, because quite often a bit of Grange that didn't quite make the grade for Grange cascades into 389. So we start at the top and work our way through. So to your question, in this bin 28 blend of 2017, look, I haven't looked it up, but there could well be over 100 components to create the house style of bin 28 in that year of 2017. And I can say this now because we released in August of this year in Australia, the 2018. They're so different, but blind, they're unmistakably both bin 28. But side by side, very different. One's a 17, one's from 2018. You know, not unlike any wine made anywhere, you know, whether it be Burgundy, Bordeaux, these wines all show that vintage to vintage variation. But by blending in the way we do, as I say, we don't have the huge oscillations and we can flatten those troughs a little bit. Because again, I mentioned the word agriculture earlier, you know, wind, rain, right time, wrong time, you know, we've got to get around that. And that's what we do with blending.
Yeah. Because we're often told over in the UK that there are very few vintage variations in Australia, but that's not true, is it?
Not true at all. If only that were the case. Look, in the state of South Australia, we're very lucky, though. We have a winter-dominant rainfall. We are the driest state of the world's driest continent. You know, we have our conditions just incredulously good for growing grapes. The clean and green approach, you know, very little reason to spray, but we do have years, like, for example, 1969, the 2011 vintage. There was a lot of rain at the wrong time. That's a long time between drinks. 1969, there's a little bit of mildew in 1974, 2011, and they're about the only three vintages I can think of just instantly. Most are pretty good. If anything, you know, heat now is an issue, drought, obviously fires and that sort of thing. But that's why we have many, many different vineyards across many viticultural regions. You know, it really is mitigating risk. It is climate proofing, future proofing. And in fact, for Yattarna, our flagship white wine, the first Yattarna was a blend of Adelaide Hills and Wollonga fruit from just down the road near McLaren Vale. You know, quite close, really. But nowadays, Yattarna can come from not 4 vineyards, not 4 viticultural regions, but 4 different states of Australia. Wow. You know, the high country in New South Wales, Tumbarumba in the Snowy Mountains, southern Victoria, Adelaide Hills, highly elevated vineyards in the Adelaide Hills. And we've even gone down south to the island state of Tasmania. You can't go any further south yet than Tasmania. We have no vineyards in Antarctica.
But that is extraordinary.
Yes.
So how far are the furthest vineyards that you would use for the Yattarna?
Well, Yattarna, if you were to look at snow, hundreds and hundreds, if not 1,000 or 2K. I haven't actually, you know, got the protractor or whatever on the map, but, you know, southern New South Wales to southern Victoria to Tasmania is quite a distance. And that's going, you know, north to south. If you go east to west as well, all the way back west to the Adelaide Hills, that's a huge catchment area. But what we do with those wines, that Chardonnay fruit, and some of it goes into our bin 311, you know, which is in the picks of this selection. That material is literally on the cusp, just on the cusp of physiological ripening, that Chardonnay. You go another few hundred metres up, the grapes don't physiologically ripen. Or in the instance of latitude, you go any further south, they don't physiologically ripen. It's very high risk. In a cooler year, you know, you need other areas as a backup. Very risky winemaking. But that's what gives us that tightness, that linearity, that clarity on the palate with our Chardonnays. And many of these Chardonnays now are astounding people from the, you know, Northern Hemisphere with their purity of fruit, their lightness on the palate, their tightness, their definition. You can only do that by getting that fruit exactly as you want it. And it doesn't come from one vineyard every year. The vineyard is all important, but it's lovely to have that choice of vineyards to blend with. A wine has just done very well in a certain United Kingdom competition, in fact, just in the last week or two. It's a Penfolds Cellar Reserve Adelaide Hills Chardonnay. It's a single vineyard Chardonnay of Penfolds. So you can do it from single vineyards, but not the same single vineyard every year. And for some of our larger blends, we can't be doing that. We need a little bit more surety. Yeah.
So with this Chardonnay and drawn from so far afield, do you press the grapes where they are and then blend the juice, or do you truck the grapes to Adelaide? I mean, you can't truck it from Tasmania. It's there are other ways you'll have to go. So just talk us through the logistics.
Yeah, the logistics for Chardonnay are very different to that for red, yes. Whole bunch press, because with our fine Chardonnays, we never crush anyway. They're very gently pressed. They're chilled down, so literally the juice is transported. The Adelaide Hills whole bunches come in and we do it all in situ in the Barossa at our winery. But elsewhere, no, all done in situ where it's all happening. And logistically, it's quite complicated. The barrel fermentation, of course, all happens in the Barossa. At our McGill winery, we dabble only in red wine. But, you know, with reds, quite often we will crush in situ, and in effect, the trip is a bit of a cold soak almost, quite often though it's not cold. So already you're leaching out colour and flavour and character out of the skins, which is what you want with red wine. With whites, no, you want very little phenolic transfer. You don't want that oxidative thing happening, or you want to minimise it. And barrel fermentation is, of course, everything now with Chardonnay. Lees management and barrique, whole bunch pressing, but it's the sourcing that is probably the critical number one. You need that raw ingredient from the right soil, from the right vineyard in the right year to go into that blend.
Right. We've got slightly off track. That was my fault talking about Chardonnay, but the Bin 28, it is, as you said, it's 2017, but the tannins are so soft. It's really velvety. It's extraordinarily approachable now.
Indeed. No what we refer to as ellagic acid-derived tannins out of the new oak. So the tannins are really coming from a little bit of, 2-3-year-old oak. Of course, there's an impartation of tannin, but not to the same extent. The tannin out of the seed, out of the skin, we try and minimise by not keeping the Shiraz grapes on skins, or dare I say on seeds, for too long after the primary ferment. At a Grange level, a 707 Cabernet level, RWT, those ones don't even finish their fermentation and they're taken off skins, they're taken off seed. So you get the lovely, more desirable phenolics, the less green, the less harsh, the less astringent. So you get that accessibility, but it's a little bit misleading because it's so accessible. Drink it soon. No, the mindset is very different. You can have immediacy, quite often in accessibility, and that longevity to follow. It's not, back in the old days, the mindset, if it's going to go the distance, it must be unyielding as a younger wine. And conversely, if it's successful and young, it's probably just going to fall over 10 years later. Not so. A great wine doesn't, as we know, become a great wine in year 23 or year 31. They start off good, they just unfurl and manifest different characters over time. So if you have that magical word, that balance, day one, it should stay with you. If the pH, the acidity, and everything is in balance all the way through that lovely lifetime of the wine, ideally.
Well, I must say it's in perfect shape now. It's so rich, so soft, velvety, really quite profound. And I would love to see it in a few years. I'm not sure I could keep my hands off it, though, because that is so easy to drink now. And it's a beauty. It's really rich, but it has that lovely freshness, and I guess that's the acidity that gives it a real freshness to it.
Absolutely, and just the way it leaps out of the glass, the characters there. And this is the thing, every year, we do our own tasting notes, and they go out in those brochures, and what do you mean? It's got this and that and that, and that. You can't make them all sound interesting or spicy or whatever, but the characters just vary so much year to year. That primary fruit is manifested in many ways, but it's unmistakable 28. If we had a glass of 128 next to it, if I were to generalise it, say the 128 from Coonawarra would have more florals, more pepper, more spice. This has more of, the ripened Satsuma plum, a little bit of hoisin, a little bit of character, other than just the grape, but it's all about primary fruit, just unleashing. And it's quite captivating. As we say, quite often we sometimes don't want to sip a wine because we think what I'm experiencing on the nose probably can't be matched. I'll only be disappointed on the palate. And as we know, the great wines over-deliver on the palate what you're initially sensing on the nose.
Yeah. Well, talking of great wines, we're also in this Peter Gago's must-have icons. We've got the Saint Henri, the 2016, which I think is one of those bottles behind me. And this is known as the purest expression of Australian Shiraz. I think it's a 98 pointer, according to, I think it was James Halliday gave it 98 points. The thing is it a poor man's Grange or a rich man's Canunga Hill?
Look, dare I say neither. It is its own thing, and it's a funny thing, St Henri, from a Penfolds perspective, goes back to the early 1950s. A contemporary winemaker at Penfolds of Max Schubert, the creator of Grange, resurrected this style. This style here, Johnny, goes back to 1890, St Henri. Before it bore a Penfold badge in the 1890s and early 1900s, it was just called St Henri Claret, from the Aldana winery that we bought in the 1940s, only a stone throw from the McGill winery. So it has an incredible heritage. But what we've been hugely respectful of, as was John Davern at the time of the resurrection in the 1950s, is the way it was originally made. And up until only a few decades ago, the poor man's Grange, call it what you will, no. St Henri and Grange, there might have been like $1 price difference. Sadly, for lovers of Grange, the price went like that. Thankfully, for lovers of St Henri, such as myself, the price went like that, not quite as steep. So, no, there is a cult following for this wine, St Henri, around the world. It's a wine that's never been advertised. It's a wine that's never been entered in wine shows. It's the antithesis of a show wine. You know, it's not pumped up on new oak or alcohol or extract, or it's St Henri. In fact, as a younger wine, it's quite understated. You could almost miss it, but not 20, 30, 40, 50 years later. You know, we've recently brought back some fantastic 1933, 1911 and 1901 St Henri in little half bottles. You know, for our Rewards of Patience tasting that I referred to earlier for the edition 8 of the new text, we tasted this back to 1958. 62, the 71, like there's very little difference between 71 Grange and 71 St Henri. Depending upon the bottle, St Henri could be half a point ahead or half a point behind. And that's saying something, because the 71 Grange is a legendary Grange vintage. Yeah. So what we tend to say to people with St Henri is, don't necessarily buy it every year. My colleagues won't like me saying that. Pick the great ones and buy a heap of it. And that's what my friends do. You know, I've put 2016, this is just a personal thing, alongside the 2010, the 1990 and the 1971. Those four, I think, are the four best St Henris of the last over half a century. 16 is one of the four. So that's 16, 10, 90 and 71. That's quite a bold statement. So, you know, we drink the 16 at the moment. Oh, it's a nice wine. Don't be fooled. This wine is just at the start of its journey.
I remember when you kindly invited me to Moscow for the launch of the Block 42, I was traveling with the very lovely John Stimfig, another drinks journalist. And we were at the airport, and you'd very kindly given us all the guests, one bottle of the Saint Henri to take home. And we only had hand luggage. We were only in Moscow for 2 nights. We only had hand luggage. And I thought, oh, my God, I can't put it in hand luggage. It's got to go in the hold. So I had a small rucksack that I put in the hold and prayed that the bottle would be all right. John had completely forgotten it, had taken it on as hand luggage. And, of course, the security beeped. And the 2 security guards, very stern Russian security guards, came over and said, what is this? You know you're not allowed to take liquids on a plane. What on earth do you think you're doing? And John went, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And I said, well, what is this wine? And John said, oh, it's quite a special wine from Australia. And the first security guard said, how special? And John went, well, actually really special. And the second security guard, I swear he was licking his lips, said, what, very, very special? And John went, sadly, yes. And the security guards looked at each other and then gave it back to John and said, you don't want to leave that here then, take it with you, sir. So there is quite a surprising. Yeah. There is a God. The other wine we've got in our pack is the RWT, the Red Winemaking Trial. Sorry. So this is known as, to all its devotees, as RWT. How did it become a trial, and how did it become a successful trial? Can you just tell us a bit about its background?
Yes. Well, look, this was created in the era of my predecessor, John Duval, who followed Don Ditter, who followed Max Schubert. And the Penfolds red wine making team at the time, we all knew we wanted to do something a little bit different to Grange, almost as a counterpoint. You know, Grange to a lot of people, and you sort of touched on it a little, but it's a blend. You know, it's almost as if old blends treating. You know, it's in American oak, Quercus alba. Well, you know, American oak at the moment's not that fashionable. We have great American oak, by the way, which we air dry in Australia and create into barrels in Australia. We love American oak, as we do French oak, but to maintain style differences. So we thought, well, hang on, Grange, multi-regional, American oak matured. Why don't we give people a contemporary style mature this great Shiraz in French oak and take it only from one region, in this instance with RWT, the Barossa Valley. So Grange, multi-regional American, RWT, French oak matured, single region. And the first vintage was released in the year 2000. It was the 97. And ever since then, it's a little bit like Sonoma in a way. People are slowly finding out about it. We make less RWT than we do Grange. A lot of people aren't aware of that. And we think, yes, the smart money, if I can refer to it as that, has its eye every year nowadays on Sonoma and RWT. Grange is Grange, you know, it's always going to be up there, and we're very respectful of what it is, and special bins, and, you know, the one-offs. But we now have three great, very disparate styles of Syrah. Sonoma, the most old-fashioned, as you put it, provocatively different style of Shiraz, still made in Australia. RWT, very definitively regional, French oak matured, very, very contemporary, and then the Grange style. That's sort of at the top level. Obviously, we make other Syrah wines as well. But yes, it's really, really taken off without really much, well, again, promotion or advertising or whatever. The proof's in the pudding. People over a period of time, as I say, not long, the first was 97, which from a Penfolds perspective is 4 days ago, you know, they now know about this wine. So we're very proud to include that in the must-buys of that set.
Brilliant. And then the next wine is the Bin 389, which we're going to try now. And this is also in this must-have collection. And this is often known as the Baby Grange. And I think it was a 97 or a 98 pointer. And I know we shouldn't really dwell on price, but given this retails for, I think, roughly £60, maybe a bottle, and I think Grange could be around 500. Does this make it a real bargain? I know 60 quid's a lot to spend on a bottle of wine, but given that it's known as Baby Grange and Grange is so stratospherically expensive, is this something of a steal?
Look, personally, yes, but you always have to watch what I say about Bin 389. Anything I say here on in, halve it and then divide by 10 afterwards, and you'll get close to what I really sort of, you know, it is a favourite, always has been. We've grown up with this wine. I don't like using the word over-deliver, but Bin 389 always has. And the term Baby Grange, yes, it does get some cascading fruit out of Grange. It does get Grange barrels from the year prior for the use of the one-year-old oak in this wine. But in this instance, it does have new oak as well. It's usually between 30 and 40%. But a lot of people collect Bin 389. And in fact, officially, it's now the most cellared red wine in Australia. And I'll describe what I mean by that. With all the records with Wine Arc and all the cellaring facilities, for a long time it was Grange, but remembering we make well over 10 times the volume of this to Grange. We should have more of this cellared by virtue of the volume of both. But that's an incredulous figure. Number one, cellared red wine in Australia, Penfolds Bin 389, followed by Grange, which is incredulous. So it's not just saying these are wines that people were buying today, drinking tomorrow. A lot of people do, by the way. You can do it with 389. But a lot of people are now drinking their wines of this wine from the 70s and the 80s, you know, in a compounding sense. You know, they buy them every year and then they drink them as 10-year-olds or they drink them as 20-year-olds. And you can very, very safely do that with this. So that propensity to age, that longevity is linked to Grange. This Shiraz component, not the Cabernet, a little bit of relegated Cabernet at 707 will go into this wine. So it really has for many decades, and we're now celebrating in 2020 the 60th anniversary of this style. So it does have the track record. It does have the runs on the board. This is not fancy wordsmithing or, you know, nice back label or whatever. It's quite understated. Bin 389, Cabernet Shiraz, a wine we're very, very proud of.
And this vintage is the 17, I think.
17, yep.
So what should we be looking for here?
And in this particular year, well, you know, I look at some of my notes, which I've scribbled down in front of me. I can't go to that and say, well, the 18, for example, has something of the order of 38% new oak. This has 29% new oak. This particular release has 54% Cabernet, if I'm not wrong, or 54%. I'm sure that'll come up on the screen. Yeah, 54% Cabernet, 46% Shiraz. But if we look at the Vineyard Regions on the screen there, we can see it is very much an exemplar of multi-regional blending. You know, McLaren Vale, the Barossa Valley, Pathaway, Rattenbury down in the southeast. So we've got warmer climate fruit from McLaren Vale and the Barossa, coupled with dovetailed into cooler climate fruit from down south at Pathaway and Rattenbury to create, as mentioned, the house style of Bin 389, a style that's never wandered. You know, always stored in Quercus alba, American oak, never sees any French oak for this particular style. If you look at its stablemate, Bin 407 Cabernet, it gets to share French oak and American oak. There are other wines that are exclusively French oak. There are other wines like this, exclusively American. But in this instance, as is the case, we're looking at, you can see on the screen, 29% new, 50% 1-year-old, and 21% 2-year-old hogsheads, all Quercus alba, American oak.
That's extraordinary. I mean, you can really notice the Cabernet influence there. There is that hint of cassis.
Oh, yes.
It's got more of a tannic backbone than the 28. But again, incredibly approachable. Yes. That's, you know, you could drink that very happily.
Absolutely. Now. Yeah. You know, it's the second or the third sip where you realise that you've got another level on Bin 28, which I don't mind saying. I'm not pushing Bin 28 down by elevating, you know, the merit of 389. 28 is what it is. It's 389 is a more expensive wine, and it should be. It's got higher quality fruit in it. It's got new oak. It's very, very tailored. You know, this is, if we were in Bordeaux, we'd be blending Cabernet with Merlot or Cabernet Franc or Petit Verdot. The great Australian red wine blend is of Cabernet with Shiraz or Shiraz with Cabernet. It just works incredulously well, and they age so well. You know, the 1990, I had to do the arithmetic. I was talking to someone the other day, you know, the 1990 is doing that at the moment. And I think to myself, well, it's a young wine, and you do the arithmetic. 30 years old. How did that happen, Johnny? How can a 1990 be 30 years old? Oh, what happened?
But this has such a lovely savoury note on the finish, doesn't it? Because there's all the succulent fruit, the softness. Yes. There are the tannins there, but there's that lovely savoury finish that just brings it all together. That's a fabulous wine.
Very different texture. The oak is acting there. It's not sort of taking over. It's, you know, framing the wine. But to your point, the savoury, that lovely texture that goes all the way to the finish. And it's not trying to be something that isn't. It's not pumped up again on alcohol or extract or whatever. There's just a nice balance to it. I think the best of it's ahead of it, to be honest. But to your earlier point, you know, accessible already.
Well, it's just, I mean, I tend to leave my wines too long, but then when I try something like this, I think, why wouldn't you drink it now? I mean, it is just so lovely. But I remember my old boss at Berry Brothers, Simon Berry, it's such a lovely guy. And I was once talking to him about how long one should leave wines. And he said, no, you try one and it may be a bit young, but you get all the joy of thinking how it's going to turn out. And then you try one more a month or 6 months later. And he said, that is why the good Lord put 12 bottles in a case. Because when you get to the last one, it should be perfect.
Absolutely. And we spend a lifetime, don't we, you know, perfecting the craft of drink sooner or later, or how compressed to have the 12, or how elongated that journey should be. And that's part of the enjoyment of wine, making the odd mistake. And, you know, the worst case scenario is when you buy some of these wines, you have to drink them a bit earlier than you anticipated, you know, but it is a mortal sin holding on to them for too long. Our Re-Caulking clinics around the world, we're now into the 29th year of those Re-Caulking clinics. And invariably, it's not just about putting new corks into old bottles and vintages. It's literally, you know, pleading with some people to, like, please drink it. You know, we've put a new cork in, it's no longer leaking. We've corrected the, you know, the headspace, the ullage or whatever, but this wine is ready. You know, and they're very educational. A lot of people just think the older they get, the better they get. Well, you know, it's a parabola, isn't it? It's sort of up to a point, The great ones will plateau, some of the great ones for decades, but they all ultimately go into a decline phase. And everyone seems to want to drink the wine at the end of the plateau or in that decline phase. And I'm thinking, no. Please, on the ascent or the start of the plateau, if you really know the wine, edge it out a bit further, but not in decline, please. But again, that's all part of wine and learning about wine and experiencing it and going on that journey.
Yeah. You don't want to be like the gardener who says, "Oh, Peter, it's so nice to see you. I wish you'd come last week because those daffodils were out and they look so beautiful, but they're gone now." Or, "I wish you could come next week when the roses are out." You just want to get it right.
Yeah, exactly. Great analogy. Great analogy.
You mentioned the Re-Caulking Clinic. Can you just explain a bit about that? Because that is something that Penfolds is very well known for, that people can take bottles and have it re-corked and assessed by an expert. Can you just explain how it works?
Absolutely. Well, the great thing about this process too is, to this day, they are still free, a free service to Penfold collectors. Any red wine of ours that is 15 years or older can be taken to a clinic. A lot of people in the early days just thought it was for Grange and some of the flagships. No, any Penfold red wine 15 years or older. When the client comes in, we assess the level, we visually inspect the bottle. We have a little template. If the wine is too far down, we say straight away, well, sorry, we can recork this for you, but we can't certify it. And we certify in conjunction either with Christie's or Sotheby's, or in Australia with Langton's. So we only try 15 ml or less of the wine, which is 2% or less of the volume of the wine. If we took out any more than that, then we're really affecting the integrity of what's left. We're putting too much into the bottle. It's a blend of two vintages then almost. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason too why we will only ever recork once, because we can't organoleptically assess a 2% addition. We've tried that after a clinic, a year after a clinic, 10 years after a clinic, compared with an unadulterated wine out of a museum. But if you did it a second time, it'd be 4%, and you can detect that difference quite easily. But yes, the new cork goes in, stamped and dated, a new capsule, tissue wrapped, certified, if the wine is successful. But what we also do, if a wine is not as it should be for that given vintage, it still might be drinkable but not certifiable. It will get a white dot. It won't be certified. It will get a plain cork and no capsule. So nothing's been lost. It's just that, in effect, our ulterior motive is to take bad wines out of the system. We're, in effect, improving the gene pool. But it's great, around the world, these have been happening now, as I say, for 29 years. We've done right across China, across Asia, across Europe. I think we've done 4, possibly 5 in London, but, a number in Hong Kong. Australia, we do it every 2 years, every capital city. Do you realise after 29 years in Australia, 8 Penfold winemakers working for 3 days from 9 in the morning till 6 at night? It's just incredulous. We thought after 10, 20 years, the response would diminish the other way. And it's great for the world of wine too. The actual emotion and just the experience is very camera friendly. TV stations come in, sometimes radio interviews, lots of, it really helps make this thing called wine a little bit more meaningful, because these are not just bottles of wine, as we've often said, they're stories. Mm-hmm. Everyone who comes into the clinic, whether they're a multi-millionaire or mum or dad off the street, doesn't much matter. Where they bought it, how much they paid for it, was it a gift, is it a family heirloom? You get all of that sort of thing happening. They're great. You can tell I don't like going to them.
And when you certify, are you certifying that it's the quality it should be, or you're certifying it to last another 10 or 15 years?
It's certified to a benchmark of what that vintage should be like at that point of time. Like, as an example, a 1968 Grange I've never much cared for. It opens up almost with a naphthalenic nose, it blows off, but I've never much cared for that. So I don't look at a 68 Grange and score it as if I'm looking at a 2010 or a 90 or a great 53. If it is as it should be for the 68, it gets certified. But, you're not improving the worth of that bottle. And I say to people, you're not giving it another 50 years life. What you are doing is you're arresting further deterioration due to oxidation or leakage or whatever. And people are very good. The session, because you're dealing directly with a winemaker, is almost like a free counselling session. We call them clinics, red wine re-corking clinics, because it's very clinical. You know, the white gloves almost, everything's white, everything is very pristine. You know, no nonsense. The owner gets to taste his or her wine. They usually agree. There have been a few tears here and there over the years, but, you know, nothing too dramatic, but everyone is treated the same. We have certified many bottles, but we've also rejected many bottles. And there's been very little disputing. You know, people usually know and they can tell even before you open them what to expect. But some people are hugely elated after the experience. Others are disappointed, but everyone leaves reasonably happy. And for us, look, what would you rather spend money on? You know, big billboards or whatever? No, re-corking clinics are a great, I think, end use of, you know, a few of our dollars, because they are very expensive programs to put on around the world.
Yeah. Thank you. And leaving the red wines and the re-corking for a minute, I'd love to talk to you about your champagne project, because you've recently got into cahoots with Champagne Tierno to make a Penfolds Tierno champagne. I'd love to know a bit more about that, how it came about, and whether there are any other projects like that. I'm a huge fan of your Father Grand Tawny port, and it is Father Grand Tawny, not Grandfather Tawny, isn't it? Father Grand Tawny port.
Well, we have a father, would you believe, a grandfather and a great-grandfather. There are three different levels, 3 different ages of port. And then there's the ultimate, the 50-year-old liqueur tawnies. We're not allowed to use the word port anymore, but everyone knows they are a tawny exemplar. But no, look, the Champagne project is hugely exciting. We used to, of course, and it was great when we released the 3 champagnes out of the 2012 Champagne vintage. It was wonderful to see alongside that a 1912 Penfolds Minchinbury, which we in those days called champagne, but of course it wasn't. In California and Australia, we used the champagne, and it was wrong to have used it, but it was modelled on, you know, the great benchmark of this thing called champagne. So it was wonderful. The century in between them, the 1912 Minchinbury of Penfolds, and then the 2012 Tierno by Penfolds, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir Cuvée. The other 2 wines is a Blanc de Blanc, single vineyard Grand Cru from Aviz, and a 2012 single vineyard Grand Cru Blanc de Noir from AE. So very much done in the Penfold way, starting at the top. They were those 3 wines, because they are not inexpensive. Australian dollars, $280 a bottle. Now, in the new year, there will be a non-vintage rosé coming out, not at 280, but at 80. And we're very, very excited by that, because, you know, we want people to try and drink these champagnes. But the question of, well, why champagne? Well, why not? You know, we love Australian sparkling wine. I used to make Australian sparkling wine. I joined Penfolds in the late 80s to do exactly that. For my first 4 years at Penfolds, I was in sparkling wine. But we discontinued, and now we've resurrected it with champagne. The Tierno family are a wonderful worldly family. They have an involvement in 2 other champagne houses, as well as some Bordeaux properties. Stanislas, who I work with directly, and the 2 chefs de caves, Nicolas and Laurent, and Stanislas, but Stanislas's father, Alain, was a champagne broker many years ago. So, you know, ultimately we hope we will be able to buy some vineyards of our own, but not just for the sake of buying it. That's why we're in no hurry to buy anything. But this collaborative thing is just so good. And I often say when things are real, they happen. And this has been such a natural, easy thing that has already gained, you know, great plaudits for. So we're extremely happy with the way it's gone, and with the 3 wines out of 2012. Very, very pleased.
And is it an equal partnership between the 2 of you? How does it work? I mean, you give the winemaking expertise, they bring the fruit.
Oh, no. I am part of their team. You know, they have the champenois, sort of local knowledge, both in the vineyards and in the winery. I bring sparkling wine sort of know-how to a certain extent, but as a member of the blending team, you know, with them. It is very much, you know, a coalition of partners, really. And in this instance, the fruit is accessed via them. But this is a toe in the water for us. You know, Last year, I was able to get and walk the vineyards, and I do the blending, obviously. The dosage trials this year we had to do virtually. But even last year when I did dosage trials, we didn't even go into Champagne. We did them at the TNO office in Haussmann in Paris. So we had everything. It was just like being back at our winery with Penfolds winemakers. Everything was done blind, and we had just as many disagreements, and then we came up with what we thought was the best dosage for those three wines. But the ones we've just done for the next vintage, 2013, the two single vineyard wines, we did that just about 3 weeks ago. And we weren't quite as concordant. But that's what teamwork is about. That's what winemaking teams are. But we're across oceans doing this classification. But it was done virtually and quite successfully, we hope. But the proof will be in the pudding. Yeah.
Yeah. And as I say, I'm a huge fan of your Tawny, which I think is woefully underpriced. I have to say, it's such good value. But given that you make such good port styles, if you're doing other collaborations, can we expect to see a Penfolds port from the Douro Valley with the Symingtons or the Taylor Fladgate partnership?
Oh, well, Taylor Fladgate partnership, Taylor Fladgate and Yeatman founded in 1692. David Gimran studied with us at Roseworthy. We go to Portugal whenever we can, and David gets back over here. But look, the Douro is the Douro. Their vintage ports, oh, wow. Their Tawny ports are very different to our styles. But we have been making ports, I shouldn't use the term, those Tawny styles since the early 1800s. The Portuguese had to ship wine across an English channel back in the day, and they fortified them to make that journey down the Douro, across the channel into London or whatever. We had to traverse oceans, 12,000 miles to get back to the mother country of England. So back in the day, Penfolds was 90+% fortified. So our history, our blending, our Solera systems, our house blends really do have a fortified derivation. So, we pride ourselves in the fact that we're still making those wines. And when we released the 50-year-old just a few years ago now, people had said, these wines are multiples of the price of Grange. Oh, you'll never sell them. Well, there's a queue for them each year. Admittedly, at the 50-year-old level, there isn't much in the way of volume, but 50-year-old, great-grandfather, grandfather, father in our club are three lovely tiers of a wonderful expression that is quintessentially Australian in character.
Yeah.
Very different to the Portuguese Tawny styles.
Peter, you're a sand dancer, Geordie, whatever you will. You're now in Australia. You've got this collaboration with TNO. If you weren't making wine in Australia so successfully, is there anywhere you would just personally like to be making wine?
Look, one thing we haven't covered, we're dabbling at the moment in Bordeaux. We're also dabbling in California. Steph Darton and Andrew Borden, two Penfolds winemakers, that will be revealed in March of next year. That is actually happening. But personally, I'd like to go back to the home of Dr. Christopher Orson Penfold, perhaps, not too far out of Sussex. I don't think I'll go all the way back up north to the northeast to make anything, but wouldn't it be good dabbling in some of that limestony soil down in the south there? I'll say no more.
I wait to hear more with interest, because that's exactly where I'm sitting at the moment, in the South Downs.
Aha.
But Peter Gago, as always, it's such a pleasure to see you. I wish we were in the same room rather than 11,000 miles away. But indeed. Peter, I'm a huge admirer of yours. I'm a huge admirer of your wines. And thank you so much for giving us your time today, but also for curating this really lovely collection of wines. So this is Peter Gago's must-have icon wines. You can find details either on the Spectator Wine Club website or Winery Collection, thewinerycollection.com. And we've got 4 stunning wines for £320, plus a free bottle of the Bin 28, which I've just tried, and I can tell you is in astounding form. And Peter, you, as always, are in astounding form. You look younger and healthier whenever I see you. So bless you, Peter.
If only.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for putting together this really nice collection of wines. Peter, see you again soon, I hope.
Much appreciated.
And goodbye, everyone. Thank you for
Johnny.
joining us.
Thank you, Spectator. Thank you.